Okay. COSO Enterprise Risk Management, ERM framework. Before we start this subunit, let us discuss some basic terminologies, some basic terms. First of all, COSO stands for Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. It is not a governmental entity. It is basically sponsored by 5 entities in the US. It is sponsored by the Institute of Internal Auditors, the only institution in the world governing the profession of internal auditing, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, your very own Institute of Management Accountants. This AAA is an association of accountants in America, or American Accounting or Accountants Association. Just like we have AAT in Pakistan and in UK as well. And then there's the 5th one, FEI, the Financial Executive International. So these are the 5 sponsoring organizations, and some industry bigwigs also are a part of COSO. So they provide you a framework. We have read your COSO internal control framework in your part 1, much more detail. And again, that is not something we can call a piece of law. It's not statute. It doesn't have the force of law. It is just guidance. Thought leadership. Whatever you're going to study now doesn't have the force of law. It is just guidance, direction that the companies may or may not follow. Okay, so let us just read the basic terminologies first. First, let us see what is risk. We have already read in your 1.6. Risk is any unforeseen event that might prevent an organization from achieving its objectives. So in other words, risk is the possibility that an event will occur that might prevent an organization from achieving the business objectives. What are the business objectives? Profit, growth, survival, value addition, so on and so forth. So this is the description of risk. It's a possibility that events will occur and affects the achievement of strategy and the business objectives. Then next terminology is values. Values are the beliefs in an organization. Organizational entity within the employees within the organization have certain beliefs in something. Like in FTC, we believe that hard work leads to success. You have to do climb multiple times, 5 to 6 times. You have to do Wiley multiple times. You have to write mocks. That's what we believe in. So the beliefs in an organization, and they may take any form. Then we have culture. Yesterday I defined culture as the way we do things around here. That's the simplest acceptable definition given by Charles Handy, a management theorist. The way we do things around here. But the more formal definition of culture is that it consists of attitudes of employees, management, behavior, and understanding about risk in an organization. Since we are talking specifically about the risk, the simple word culture means the way we do things in a company. But from the point of view of risk management, so it is attitudes towards risk, behavior and understanding of risk. So this culture, specifically from the point of view of risk, is its attitude towards risk, whether you are risk seeking or risk averse or risk neutral. What do you understand by the term risk? So here the word culture is specifically seen from the point of view of risk. Then next is mission. We have read it in detail. Mission is what the organization stands for. The organization's core purpose of existence. Why does an organization exist? So mission is the organization's core purpose. What is vision then? Vision is the organization's aspirations for the long term. What the organization wants to be in the long run. What it wants to achieve. It's the organization's aspiration. What it intends to acquire or attain over a period of time. So vision, it's an organization's aspiration for what it intends to achieve over the long term. That's what you call vision. So there is a confusion among theorists that which comes first. Is it mission that comes first or the vision? So you can argue both ways. Whether mission is first or the vision is first, there's still the debate is on. Next, core values. First of all, values mean beliefs in an organization that are shared amongst employees and management. Beliefs, values. Then what are core values? Core values are essential beliefs. Just beliefs are values. Essential beliefs are core values. So core values are the organizational essential beliefs about what is acceptable or unacceptable. Essential values that are at the heart of any organization. They are called core values. Next we have capabilities. Capabilities, as we discussed, these are the core competencies, resources, unique abilities, unique skills that set you aside from your competitors. So capabilities are the skills that an organization will employ. Here we know what capability means. We have read it in strategic management. These are the core competencies, unique skill, unique resource. But in risk management, the idea is little different. So that is why you have to revisit these terms from enterprise risk management point of view. So capabilities from the point of view of risk management is the skills needed to carry out the entity's mission and vision within the ERM framework. Okay, next, practices. Practices, the way we do business. Practice in a business, but here from the risk management point of view, practices are the collective methods used to manage risk. So whatever term we are studying is to be viewed from the point of view of risk and ERM framework. So practices in context of ERM are the methods we employ to manage risk, the way we adopt to manage risk. Next, the word strategy. We have read in Unit 8, Part 1. Strategy is the course of action to achieve a goal. But here, it has been viewed differently from ERM perspective. So strategies tells us how an organization will achieve its mission and vision, how it will achieve its mission and vision, and how it applies it to core values. What are the core values? These are the essential beliefs that organizations believe in. They are at the heart of any organization. Next key term is business objectives. Now there is a little conflict between what we have read in strategic management and what we are going to study right now. Strategy, as we discussed in Unit 8, strategic management, is the way we adopt the plans we make to achieve our goals, long term or short term, right? But here he says that business objectives are the steps. Business objectives are the step. In fact, we have read that strategy is the way to achieve business objective. That's what we have studied and that's what we agree upon. But the term used in ERM is of different nature. It said that the business objectives are the steps taken to achieve strategy. And what is strategy? Taking us to the long-term mission and vision. So business objectives, I'm sure you would have read somewhere that the good objectives are smart objectives. Smart. Objectives have to be smart. What does it mean? It means your objectives must be specific. Specific. What exactly you want to achieve? Your specific objectives, specified in proper way, they must be measurable. There may be a way to measure them. To what extent have you been successful? They must be attainable, possible to achieve. They must be realistic. And finally, they must be time specific. There must be some time set for achieving those objectives. So you say, I want to qualify CMA. Fine, it's an objective. It doesn't fit well because you haven't specified the time. How many months you want to take. So the good objectives have features that they are specific, they are measurable, they are attainable, they are realistic, and they are time specific. So that's the idea, that business objectives are the steps that are smart, taken to achieve the strategy. And what is the strategy? It tells us how the organization will achieve its vision and mission, and how it will apply to its core values. Next, tolerance. I'm sure from the point of view of variance analysis, company has set certain deviations, either in favorable or in adverse, within which the management can tolerate. So the tolerance level from the point of view of performance management, we are aware. So how do we take this word here, tolerance? Look at this graph first. Okay, what does this tell us? We have performance on x-axis and risk on the y-axis. It tells us as we focus more on performance, risk goes up. If you want better performance, exerting your maximum to obtain the performance, risk goes up. So, as we expect more performance, full throttle on performance, the risk goes up. That makes sense. This upward sloping curve indicates that as we focus more on performance, the associated risk goes up. So performance is directly related with risk. That makes sense. Alright. Then what this dotted line means? This dotted line represents your target, your standard cost. For example, standard costs, standard revenues, standard quantities of your material, standard quantities of your labor. So you have allowed a certain leverage that your adverse variance can go a maximum up to this, or your favorable can fall to a maximum this. So you have set certain limits within which the deviations can occur. This is what you call tolerance. Same is true for risk, that you have set a certain target and you allow the deviation from that target up and down to a certain limit. This is what you call tolerance. This gap is tolerance. Okay, the tolerance, the difference from standard to the maximum allowed deviation. And that's what we have achieved right now, actual performance. So actual performance has to be within the tolerance limit. Either it has to be here or here, but it has to be within the tolerance. Just like your variance is adverse and favorable, they have to be within a certain tolerance limit. So it makes sense. We've got the idea about risk, performance, target, tolerance, actual performance. This thick line indicates that this is your risk appetite. Risk appetite is the willingness to take the risk. How much risk you are willing to accept is called risk appetite. So moving on. So what is tolerance then? Tolerance is the range of acceptable variations in performance. Within a certain limit, certain deviation is allowed. Next term is risk profile. We have different sorts of investors from investors' point of view. Some investors seek risk. They are called risk seekers. Some run away from risk. They are called risk averse. And some are neutral to risk and averse. They are called risk neutral. So risk profile is an evaluation of individual's willingness and ability to take risk. There are two things that you need to consider simultaneously. First is willingness, how much risk you are willing to take. And second, can you absorb that risk? Can you bear that risk? So willingness and ability simultaneously. It gives you risk profile. And it is also known as risk appetite, how much risk you are willing to accept. Next term, portfolio view. See, the difference between just risk management, we studied in the previous unit, and the enterprise risk management is that the previous risk management was scattered. Each department had its own risk management system. Procurement has different risk management system. Inventory, treasury, etc., etc., etc. That was risk management, that was diverse, scattered. When you say ERM, it's an integrated risk management approach. It's risk management at entity level, risk management for the organization as a whole. That's the difference. So the risk portfolio means that we just don't view risk at departmental levels alone or functional levels alone. We view the risk as an entity level activity. So portfolio views mean it is a composite or combined view of the risks related to entity-wide strategy, not just functions or departments. Got the idea? So it's a holistic approach to risk. It's a more detailed approach to risk. Any confusion? Next key concept is opportunity. Opportunity means the same as we see it in our normal strategic management concept. Opportunity means any action or potential action that creates or alters goals or approaches for the creation and preservation and realization of value. We will discuss these in detail in the coming slide. What is the preservation of values? What is realization? What is creation? So any event any action that can create value. Value from the point, we have read values differently. Values from the point of view of an organization are beliefs. Core values are essential beliefs. But the value, the word value here means value for the shareholder. Shareholder needs money. He increased share price. He needs dividends regularly. Customers need value. What does it mean? Customer need good quality output, goods or services. Bankers need value. They need prompt payment on interest and principal. So each stakeholders have certain expectations. An organization needs to give value to their stakeholders. Dividends to the shareholders, goods quality output to the customers, prompt payments of interest and principal to the bankers. So this is, you're giving value to the stakeholders. But the value concept from the point of organization must be kept in mind. These are the beliefs. And core values are the essential beliefs, right? So we will discuss these, how we can create value, realize value, preserve value in the coming slides that are coming the next. Okay, moving on. The next concept is risk inventory. Just like inventory of stock we also have risk inventory. What are risk inventory? We would have identified certain risks that are specific to a certain department or an activity or a process. So those identified risks that can affect the organization's objective are called risk inventory. So risk inventory consists of all identified risks that affect the strategy, the way you will achieve your mission and vision, and the business objectives. What are business objectives? These are steps to achieve the strategy. Keep it in mind the way it is used in ERM. Alright, so how do we identify? There are various ways that were included in your previous version of ERM, that how we identify the risk. One is called brainstorming session. Departmental head and the employees sit together and then they discuss what are the risks faced by the department. This is one way to identify risk, number one. Second is the facilitated workshop. Department employees and external consultant sit and discuss what are the risks faced by the organization. One is called the simple approach. Simply download, generic approach. You simply download the risk faced by certain departments from the internet. For example, I'm working in inventory management, warehouse control, for example. So what are the risks faced by the warehouse control? Download the generic risk faced by any warehouse control department. So this is how we can identify risk. Facilitated workshop, brainstorming sessions, and an activity like this. Simply download the generic list from the internet. So risk inventory consists of all identified risks that affect strategy and business objectives. So you got the idea. Next, risk capacity. Risk capacity is the maximum amount of risk that an organization can bear, can assume. Like for example, a brokerage company that has about $18 billion of assets under management. It has quite a substantial risk capacity. It can bear more risk compared to an investment company or a brokerage firm that holds only $200 million worth of portfolio. It means comparatively this firm has much larger risk capacity, can assume more risk, but this company comparatively has a lesser risk. So what is risk capacity? Risk capacity is the maximum amount of risk the organization can assume, and it greatly depends upon your resources. A more resourceful firm can bear more risk. And the company that has less resources, definitely its risk capacity would be comparatively lower. Moving on, next is risk appetite. Be very clear on this. Risk capacity and risk appetite are different. Risk capacity is the maximum amount of risk organization assumes, and risk appetite that is you are willing to assume. For example, a company with 18 billion of assets under management is willing to accept a risk exposure of 100 million. Even though 18 billion is a lot of money. So even the company has a huge risk capacity, but the risk appetite is quite low. Compared to this company that has over 200 millions of assets under management, this company is willing to take on risk of up to $180 million. See, the risk capacity is low, but the risk appetite is comparatively much higher. So they are not always moving in the same direction. Depends upon management strategy. So risk capacity is the maximum amount of risk the organization can assume, and risk appetite consists of amount and type of risk the organization is willing to accept in pursuit of value. So what is your willingness to accept and what is your capacity to accept? They're both different. So risk capacity is the maximum amount of risk that organization can assume, keeping in mind its resources, and risk appetite is what you are willing to accept. So these two terms are not coextensive, but they somehow are correlated. Remember, next, moving on. Next concept you read is inherent risk. So inherent risk is the risk that emerges from the nature of business objectives or from the type of business. So inherent risk is the risk that is inherent in a particular business. It is the risk in the absence of management actions to alter its severity. If management doesn't take any action, like a goldsmith business, if there is no guard standing outside the shop, there is a risk that the stuff might be stolen. So this is the inherent risk. If management doesn't take any action to alter the severity, so the risk that exists just because of the nature of the business, the nature of the objectives of the business, is called the inherent risk. Okay guys, then I'm sure you have the idea about residual risk. Let's say a goldsmith business, inherently risky. We have employed a guard with a gun. There are cameras installed in the facility. There is also checking of employees when they check in and check out. So we have taken certain actions to reduce the severity we have, right? Still some risk stays. That risk is actual residual risk. So what is actual residual risk? The risk that remains after management actions to alter its severity. We have a guard, we have closed circuit cameras, CCTVs that keep eye on the employees, but still there is some risk. So this is what you call the residual risk, actual residual risk. Sometimes, we will discuss in detail, there is one other type of risk also, target residual risk. I think it's not mentioned here. Like for example, a business of gold is inherently risky. So we have employed security guard cameras and we have reduced that risk to, let's say, $20,000. Right? We just maybe dismiss the security guard, for example, just crude example, because we are willing to take a risk, little higher level risk. So it means we can reduce this risk to a $20,000 level, but if we change our action, the management changes its action, changes CCTV or dismisses the security guard or some other change, then we might see that the risk might go up, and we are still comfortable with that. We are still comfortable with this $30,000 risk. So this is, in that case, is called the target residual risk. This is the target residual risk, that we have changed our action. We have changed our action and the risk has altered, and thereby the residual risk has changed, and we are comfortable with this. This is what we wanted. So this is what you call the target residual risk. Next concept is risk response, and I am sure you are familiar with this idea from your previous lecture that management has certain remedies for risk. Some risks are avoided, we will discuss it in detail. Some risks are accepted deliberately. Some risks are shared. Some risks are exploited. So these actions that management take are called the risk responses. We will discuss much more in detail in the coming slides. So risk responses, or the risk response is an action taken to bring identified risk within the organizational risk appetite. What is risk appetite? The willingness. This is the next, I think should have been here. Target residual risk, next. We have discussed it. Target residual risk is the risk the entity prefers to assume, deliberately, not 20, rather 30. So it is the risk that entity prefers to assume, knowing that the management has acted or will act to alter its severity. So we deliberately go on 20 to 30 because we know higher the risk, higher is the reward. So take an example from the right perspective. Let's say in a stock brokerage, the more risk you take deliberately, the higher reward you will earn. So deliberately management alters its action to increase the residual risk so as to earn higher returns. So sometimes our target residual risk could be higher deliberately just to gain benefit of High risk, higher rewards. So far we have read the concept values from the point of view of organization. Value means beliefs that are shared in an organization. Core values are essential beliefs, but value from the point of view of our stakeholders, customers, suppliers, employees, bankers, shareholders, society at large, they are our stakeholders. So they expect certain benefit from us. So that's the idea of value creation. An organization creates values for its stakeholders, goods for its customers, dividends, share price increase for its shareholders, economic equality to some extent to the society at large, prompt payment to the bankers, prompt payment to the suppliers, good working condition to the employees, better growth prospects for the new jobs, new joiners or new job seekers. So this is how the organization can create value. Value creation basically is focused towards external stakeholders. Your shareholders, your customers, idea I've conveyed you. So the 3 points that I told you that we discuss: value preservation or preserving the value. When you're using your resources in such a way that you're continuously generating benefits for your shareholders. Certain companies are called blue chip stock. Certain companies' shares are called blue chip stock. Why? Because they are highly valued. Why they are highly valued? Because these companies have a history of consistent dividend payments. They have a history of consistent high performance. So these companies have sustained the value. That's why they're highly valued. Their share prices are always rising. So value preservation, when the value of resources for the stakeholders used is sustained. Your customers, your suppliers, your shareholders are getting consistent value from the company. This is called value preservation. Value realization. If the company is doing good, using its resources most effectively, and the benefit of this activity is transferred to the shareholders, to the customers, to the suppliers, to the bankers, to the society, it is called value realization. So value realization is where benefits are transferred to the stakeholders. And then there is one more concept called value erosion. Clearly, it is opposite to value preservation. When the management or the organization does not use the resources effectively, in fact, the resources are misused or destroyed, generating less return than expected. So, value erosion when management's strategy does not produce expected results for the stakeholders, or the management does not perform day-to-day tasks, thereby the organization will not achieve its objectives, and hence the stakeholders will not get the value they expect from the organization. The board of directors, clearly the highest, the most powerful entity within an organization, the most powerful group of individuals in the organization. So these people provide risk oversight. We know, we have read in strategic management, they do 2 types of job: strategic direction and oversight. That's the overall from strategic management point of view. But we are studying the board's role with regard to enterprise risk management. So in this case, the board has a role to play. It provides risk oversight of ERM culture, how the risk is being managed, the capabilities and practices. So they have to keep an eye on the ERM culture, how ERM is being implemented, how it's being managed, the capabilities of the organization practices. So they will keep an eye, because board of directors, the senior most people do not involve deeply into operations, so they have just oversight role. They provide direction and keep the oversight. Next layer, immediately below the board of directors, is the audit committee. I'm sure you people have read it in your part 1. Audit committee is a part of board of directors composed of entirely independent directors. One of them at least must be a financial expert. So we have discussed it in detail. So the board is sitting at the top, has a role for ERM. What does it do? It oversees ERM, capabilities and practices of ERM system. Audit committee is a part of board of directors, but the composition of audit committee, I told you, it's like directors who do not have any operational role, independent directors. Audit committee, often required by regulators, Securities Exchange Commission, stock exchanges, even the relevant corporate governance laws in any country require that a listed company should have an audit committee, and this should be the composition. So this is required by law, audit committee, and audit committee does have a role in risk management. I told you, internal auditors, the chief audit executive have dual reporting. It reports administratively to the chief executive officer on day-to-day operations, procurement, marketing, sales, inventory, and it functionally reports to the audit committee. That functional reporting reports involves three types of reporting: reports on internal control, reports on governance, and report on risk management. So that report on risk management goes to the audit committee. It's one of the part of the functional reporting. Chief audit executive to the audit committee. Next, risk committee. This committee is formed specifically with a mandate to oversee the enterprise risk management. An executive compensation committee. Chief executive officer cannot, should not, must not set his own salary, must not set his own perquisites. Someone independent from the management should do so. And this is done by executive compensation committee, and it is majority of this committee is composed of independent directors, do not have any operational role. So they set what the executive management should be paid, what should be the compensation of CEO and the executive management. So the job of this committee is to set compensation. Management should not be allowed to set its own compensation. So this committee will do so. So executive compensation committee, then we have a nomination and governance committee. This committee oversees selection of directors and executives. CEO, who should be the next CEO, like I'm sure you people must be aware, Jack Ma of Alibaba is stepping down in September 2019. So who would be the next after him? It will be decided if there is any nomination or governance committee. Then below them is management, of course, senior management that has the overall responsibility of ERM and has generally responsible oversight. Moving on further, some other key terms. Organizational biases. FTC's natural bias is towards GLIME. GLIME CMA, GLIME CIA, GLIME CPA. So that's the idea, bias, natural tendency towards something that can be questioned. That's what you call it. So bias basically is a tendency to lean in a certain direction, often to the detriment of an open mind. So maybe I'm just always endorsing GLIME. Any one of you can challenge, so why GLIME only? Because maybe I'm doing it just with a closed mind. So what is bias? It's a tendency to lean in a certain direction, often to the detriment of an open mind. One shouldn't be closed-minded, just only this and this alone. So that's what some organizations have, certain biases, that we should sell our product to that particular market, or we should just pursue equity financing only. We should not go for bonds and bank loans. This is natural bias. I have seen some businesses who they are small and they will remain small because they are not willing to take loans because they consider interest to be haram, riba. They don't want to get their companies listed. Okay, go for listing. If you want to go for bonds and loans, fine, get your companies listed. Even they're not willing then. They don't want any external influence. So this is natural bias toward external funding. So what is bias? Is a tendency to lean in a certain direction. So it could be a source of risk for an organization. Next, operating structures. Organization can be structured in different ways. One is conventional hierarchical structure with vertical arrangement, the top management, mid-level and the operating staff. Some organizations are matrix structures, like region A, region B, region C. So there are regional heads ABC, as well as there are certain products, product X, product Y, product Z. So a person who is working here is reporting to two bosses, the regional boss B and the product director X. So organization can be structured this way. So operating structure of the organizations can be a linear structure, hierarchy could be a matrix structure, it could be a team structure, anything like that. So moving on, legal structure. Businesses can have different form of legal form, like could be a sole trader, it could be a partnership, it could be a limited partnership, it could be a private limited company, it could be a public limited company, or it could be simply an association of persons, like Hindu undivided family. Right? So that's what you call legal structure. Again, organization biases could result in certain risks. Operating structures could offer certain risks. Legal structure, varying legal structures can offer various risks. So whatever we are studying in ERM, every term has some imperative of risk, some pointing towards certain types of risk. Management structure means, like for example, in the finance department, it would be headed by a certain person, then immediately below him would be some assistant manager, and then so on. So there is a clear line of reporting that the subordinate will report to the assistant manager will be to the head, and head to the finance director. So organization should have such reporting lines, fully defined who reports to whom. Right. Next, then there are certain internal factors that must be considered in an organization. Internal factors, the level of judgment and autonomy allowed to personnel. Let us take an example and we will apply that example throughout. Let us consider a brokerage company, because I come from one of the leading brokerage companies. I will take it as a model to explain the other concepts. The risk that company faced, the risk of changing strategies, how the risk was reported, how the business was organized. So take an example. We are going to take an example of a brokerage company that is quite expanded, has over 40 branches across the country. So let us take that example. A brokerage house, there's a firm that helps its clients buy and sell shares, buy and sells financial instruments. That's what you call the brokerage house. Broker firm, a listed brokerage company. So take that as an example, and we will apply all the terms that we're going to study towards that specific company. So internal factor for that brokerage house. The level of judgment and autonomy allowed to personnel. Employees working in that brokerage house, to what extent are they allowed to make decisions? Their decision-taking ability will directly affect the risk. The CEO of my company put the whole group of companies in danger when we tried to acquire Diwan Farooq Motors in Pakistan. Diwan Farooq Motors is the only authorized agent to sell BMWs in Pakistan. So we tried to acquire that company, a hostile takeover. We tried to purchase this company share from the market. CEO did this. Did he do it with the approval of the board, or did he do it all alone? That's still something I do not know, because I joined after this debacle. So, internal factors, the level of judgment and autonomy allowed to personnel, the employees and the management, to what extent have they been given the authority to make decisions? Their decision can directly affect the business. We lost millions of rupees in that transaction. And eventually the CEO was kicked out and is currently working in Canada and is doing PhD there. So we set certain standards and rules for our employees that they must follow. Standard operating procedures, how the clearing department should work, how the settlement department should work in a brokerage company. HR manuals, how HR will work, will be fully defined. All this for managing risk. And then finally the reward system in place. The broker agent who has generated the most commission for the company will be paid the highest bonus. Likewise, the finance department, how effective has it been in reducing the cost of borrowing, will be given bonus. Human resource department, how effective has it been in forecasting and meeting the needs of HR for the organization, they will be rewarded accordingly. So We have a reward system in place, we have standard and rules and SOPs to be followed, and we have certain level of autonomy allowed to employees. All these are sources of risk. At the same time, some risk being met. Then there are some external factors also that must be considered. Certain legal requirements that must be met. Security Exchange Commission have certain expectations, certain reportings. Stock exchanges, internal revenue services. So certain legal requirements are to be met. If they're not met, again it will serve as a source of risk, regulatory risk. And then there are certain expectations from various stakeholders, customers, investors, suppliers, fund providers, shareholders, so on and so forth. So all these factors are sources of risk. Okay, what we're doing, we're studying key terms used in enterprise risk management before we actually start the ERM. Next concept is dynamic risk. Dynamic risk. What is the word dynamic? What does it mean? Changing. So it means dynamic risk is a risk that keeps on changing its impact, its possibility of occurrence. So dynamic risk is the risk that is constantly changing. Accordingly, our policies for such a risk would be comparatively different than any static risk. Risk appetite that we have already discussed. Risk appetite is the willingness to take risk. Risk capacity and risk appetite, they are different. Risk capacity is the ability and risk appetite is the willingness, right? And they are not always coextensive. Okay, how do we assess a certain level of risk? How can it have a certain consequence for a business? We discuss in part 1 in detail. The risk can be quantified if we have two things available. First, what is the impact of the risk? The financial consequence. It's the result of the effect of the risk. Impact may be positive or negative. For example, if interest rates go up and you have loans outstanding, it's a negative impact. It has a negative consequence. Why? Because your borrowing cost would go up. To the contrary, if you have made certain investments in variable rate bond and if the interest rate go up, you earn more interest. In that case, it's a positive event. So impact can be positive and negative. I told you risk can be quantified. It can be expressed in numbers if we have two variables available. First is the impact, the consequences. And second, the likelihood. If you remember, the probability of occurrence multiplied by the financial impact. It gives you the expected value. And through expected values, we monetize risk. We measure risk. So likelihood is the probability or the possibility that the event will occur. Okay, so it is impact multiplied by likelihood will give you the financial loss that can be sustained. Next concept is complexity. Every term we are reading is from the point of view of ERM, risk management framework. What is complexity with reference to risk? Complexity is the nature and scope of risk. Nature and what does it mean? Nature means the type of risk and scope mean how much that risk would be extensive. Like for example, in a brokerage company that is highly leveraged. Brokerage companies run on massive amounts of loans. Know that for fact. Brokerage companies all over the world run on massive leverages, loans. Sometimes loans are so huge that equities maybe 5%, loans are 95%, totally financed by loans. So imagine for such an organization, the nature of the risk is financial risk. Interest rate volatility is a financial risk. Interest rate risk is a financial risk. And the scope of that risk is that interest rate go up significantly. That's what happened in 2008. The interest rate went up beyond our capacity to meet the bankers' need. We had to default on many loans. Resultantly, many cases were filed against my company and companies in various courts across Pakistan. So you can imagine that interest rate in that case has a feature for complex risk, that its scope is quite broad in the organization. So what is complexity? It is the nature and scope of risk and interdependence of risk. Interest rate risk directly affects my business operations. It affects my settlement in the brokerage company. It's a department within the brokerage firm. Settlement that settles transaction between various sellers and buyers, also called clearing. Then there is a trading section or trading department that helps clients buy and sell. One department facilitates settlement of transactions. One department helps conducting the transaction. That's called the trading department. Trading department, settlement department, clearing department. So if interest rate go up, the impact of this would be quite pervasive in various functions of the organization. So that's what you mean by the word complexity. Moving on, certain few more terms and then we are done. I'm telling you, I have taken an example of a brokerage firm and we are trying to understand the concept of ERM from that brokerage firm. The brokerage firm is a business that helps trade in instruments, in shares. It facilitates buyers and sellers to conduct transactions in shares, in bonds, in financial instruments. And such a company is massively leveraged. Almost all of its operations are run by loans. So the next term is velocity from the point of view of a brokerage firm. What is velocity? It is the speed at which a risk affects an entity. Let's say the bank, the state bank, the central bank revises the base rate. It will instantly affect your loan payments. So velocity of this risk is massive. Velocity means the speed. Interest rates announced, the new base rates, and immediately my financing cost goes up. So for such a risk, the velocity is quite high. So it's the speed with which a risk affects the entity. Then next term is persistence. Let's say the interest rate go up. For how long it will keep affecting me? Let's say the state bank has devised the quarterly interest rate. There are various types of base rates. Quarterly, 6 monthly and yearly. So persistence means how long a risk affects an entity. How long will it keep affecting the entity, including the time it takes the entity to recover. If the interest rate goes up, for example, how much time will the company take to recover itself from the sudden interest rate hikes? When we took loans from banks in 2004 and 2005, I was here in Pakistan, the interest rates were quite low, hovering somewhere around 5%, 6%. In 2008, they jumped massively and they went above 15%, 16, 17%. It became almost impossible. The borrowing cost went up 5 times in a very short period of time. So then next is adaptability. The word is adaptability. Good organizations, those who can sustain competition, they have adaptability. They can accommodate changes. They keep on changing with the changing context. So adaptability is the entity's capability to adjust and respond to risk. If the environment is changing, if the risk being faced are changing constantly, the organization can adapt itself to changes. So adaptability is also an element to be considered while drafting an ERM plan. Then what is recovery? Recovery is the entity's capacity, not the time. It's the capacity to return to tolerance. There is a difference. Persistence is a measure of time. How many months or days do you take to recover the sudden interest rate hike? And recovery, it is the entity's capacity to return to the tolerance. It is not time. Probably it might be dollar-based measure. So persistence is time-based. How much time do you take to recover? And recovery, it is the entity's capacity to return to normal, depending upon the resources you have employed. Okay, just a few more slides for key terms, then we'll go to actual ERM model. We have read this in detail. We have 5 risk responses as per ERM. Some risk we would like to accept. It's also called self-insurance, risk acceptance, risk avoidance, the risk that should be avoided. Pursuit, we have read this in a different term, it was risk exploitation. Deliberately seeking risk to increase your returns. So pursuit means risk exploitation. Reduction, adopting certain risk mitigation techniques. This is called risk mitigation, but in ERM this is called reduction. See, the terminology is different. And then finally, he has used the word transfer. Basically, it's sharing. When you say risk sharing, it is not always insurance company. Risk sharing can be done with any counterparty, be it your customer, employee, banker, vendor, or an insurance company. Right? Let me show you something important. So this is what you call the heat map. How do we decide which risks to avoid, which one to pursue, which one to avoid, which one to transfer? It is determined using this grid. On one hand, on the y-axis, I have likelihood, which you call the probability of occurrence, and impact, which you call consequence. Certain risks which have very insignificant impact and very rare chance of occurrence is a minor, except cool. Green represents a cool color. Consequence minor, likelihood rare, except. So representing these green blocks represent these risks that must be accepted, because chances of occurrence are low. If they do occur, the consequences are very manageable. Look at contrary to these red, they are critical. The probability of occurrence is almost certain, and if they do occur, the consequences could be disastrous, critical. So it means the red marks must be avoided. These oranges one can be managed by risk reduction or risk sharing, and these greens one can be accepted. So this represents the various types of risks as per the risk mapping that we have already read. So the green one representing less impact on the business and less probability, acceptance, reduction and acceptance, and avoidance. So these are the 5 risk responses: acceptance, avoidance, exploitation or pursuit, reduction, mitigation, transferring or sharing. And we will decide according to the heat map that we just saw. Next, the key point, how do we reduce risk? We have read COSO internal control models. Risk can be reduced by instituting good system of internal controls or good risk management strategies. We have also read in our fraud risk model, opportunity of fraud. Fraud is a risk. Occurrence of fraud and error is a risk. So how do we mitigate this risk? By instituting a good system of internal controls that first of all prevents an unwanted event from occurrence. If that event occurs, it must be detected and corrected in a timely fashion. So institution of a strong internal control is our response to risk. So this is how we can reduce risk. Now there are different levels. How do we view risk? There are different levels how we view risk. First level is risk view. We just view risk. Okay, risk, we'll see that. We do nothing. We just recognize that the risk exists, but actually we do nothing. So such an approach for ERM concept is called the minimal integration. Risk view means you just know that the risks are there. You identify the risk, you assess the risk. Means you identify what are the risks an organization is facing and what is its financial implication, and you do nothing for that. You just view risks with minimal integration. Accept. So risks are identified and assessed. No action has been taken to mitigate the risk. Next, risk category view. This was minimal integration. What we are doing, enterprise risk management, ERM, an integrated entity-wide approach to manage risk for the business as a whole. For the first one, we have just assessed and identified with very limited risk management responses approach. Next is risk category view, limited integration. In this stage, we identify and assess risk like the previous one, but we also categorize them. That these are the risks for procurement, inventory, finance, treasury, various processes and activities. So we identify and assess risk and categorize them. So here we are going to take more integrated approach. This was quite dispersed. Maybe we have some responses also, but that was on case-to-case basis. But here we are having an integrated, holistic, comparatively a better approach. Third is risk profile view. That is partial integration. In this case, we have identified risk, we have assessed risk, we have categorized risk, and we have linked those risks to the business objective. How do they affect the business? This is a much better approach than the previous one. So, in this case, risks are not only identified, they are also assessed, categorized, and it is seen to what extent they affect the business objectives. This is, we can see the partial integration of the risk management process of the organization. The last one, the portfolio view. The full picture of what the risks are, assessing those risks, categorizing them, prioritizing them, and responding them at an entity level from the business point of view as a whole. So this is the most comprehensive and integrated approach to risk management. It's called full integration. So it's this composite views of risk relates to entity-wide strategy and business objectives and their effects on entity performance as a whole. Here we go. So finally, now we are entering the COSO model. First, getting the overall ideas of the basic terms. COSO risk management framework starts now. Committee of Sponsoring Organization of the Treadway Commission. Our Institute of Management Accounting is a part of the sponsoring organizations. So the question that it asks, why do we go for a composite integrated ERM? Why not the previous approach we studied in the previous subunit? So the COSO ERM provides a basis for coordinating and integrating. So integration of all the organizational risk management activities, not just like the previous unit. It was not a standalone ad hoc based risk management. It's an integrated effort for the organization as a whole. So the question is, why do we need to go for such a deep integration in risk management? Why effective integration is necessary for risk management? First of all, it will help make strategic decisions in a better way. It will improve decision making at a strategic level for the organization as a whole. Where do we allocate the resources from the center? Centralized organizations, when the resource allocated, where do we need to invest? Which division must be discontinued? Which must be funded more? Who decides? The senior management. So for the senior management, when they have this integrated risk management approach, they will be able to make better decisions. Risk management identifies the problem areas, so you will allocate your resources where they are needed. In other words, you will put your food where your mouth is. So it will enhance the performance of your business. So integrated risk management approach will benefit the organization as a whole. So a little review of what we read regarding value. Value have been seen from two contexts. Value as a belief shared by the employees. Core values are the essential beliefs, and value from the point of view of the stakeholders are what they're getting in return from the company. Various stakeholders. So seeing that in concept, value, how value is created, same repetition is when the benefits obtained from resources exceed their cost. Benefit is more than cost, of course, the value is being created. Value is preserved when this process can be repeated again and again and again. So this is what you call the preservation of the value. When the value of resources used is sustained, you get more benefit than the cost. Realized when the benefits are transferred to the stakeholders, customers, suppliers, shareholders, etc. And the last concept we discussed, value erosion. We discussed in detail when the resources are used in unproductive way. Resources are not used the way they should, resultantly cost is higher, the benefit is less. Discussed much more in detail. Now let us define the ERM definition. We have got the overall idea what the components of ERM are, various key terms discussed much more in detail. Let us define what is ERM. Let's say if the question comes on essay type and you are required to define. So what is enterprise risk management? We have read the components in detail. ERM is defined as the culture, we have studied, its culture, capabilities and practices combined. Mind the word, culture, the way we do things, capabilities, the resources, and the practices for risk management combined, integrated with the strategy and performance. For what? Culture, capabilities, practices combined with the strategy and performance. For what? For creating value, for preserving value, and for realizing value. We have been discussing in detail. So it's culture, capability, practices combined for an organization to create value, preserve value, and realize value. This is how you define. So this is the full definition that I have given in simple point form. The culture, capability, and practices integrated with strategy setting and performance that organizations rely on to manage risk in creating value, that is generating more benefit than costs, preserving value, doing it consistently, and realizing value and transferring those values to the customer. So ultimately, it's all the stakeholders driven. Alright, so this is how we define ERM. As I told you, ERM is not just a standalone ad hoc system like in the previous risk management, it's an integrated entity-wide activity. So it means that it's not just shareholders, not individual departments, we need to serve the entire spectrum of stakeholders. So ERM is based on the premise that every organization exists to provide value to stakeholders. Focus is stakeholders. ERM's focus is the stakeholders. Value creation, preservation, and ultimately value delivery. Stakeholders, we already discussed, these are the individuals and organizations that have direct or indirect interest with the business and they are directly influenced by what a business does. Customers, employees, suppliers, bankers, shareholders, and society as a whole. So the ERM is not, so we have discussed this also in the beginning, I think we discussed it in tolerance, already discussed. Moving on to roles of management with regard to risk management. As I discussed, board, immediately below board is audit committee, then the senior management, and then the operations staff. So how this risk management trickles down from top to bottom, let us see it in detail. So management has an overall responsibility for ERM. The board of directors will oversee only. Board of directors will not draft ERM policies. Board of directors will not recommend which strategy to use, which response do we need to select, except avoid. They will only oversee the work. The rest of the responsibility is on the management. So management has an overall responsibility and is generally responsible for what? For day-to-day managing of risk of various operations. They are the one responsible for implementation. Who is representing, who is the head of management in an organization? CEO. CEO is the nucleus of management. Board of directors are not themselves managing, they are overseeing, mind the word. Board of directors have the role to oversee. Who is the one who is the head of operations, head of what an organization actually does? The nucleus, CEO. So when you say who's the nucleus of management, CEO. Board of directors, they do not involve themselves in operational activities. They have an oversight role. Keep that in mind. So within the management, CEO, the nucleus of management, has the ultimate responsibility for ERM. He is the one responsible for ERM. He is the one for achievement of the organization objectives. In the larger organization, normally you won't find risk management or risk management department in mid-size or small firms. Normally the larger organization, there is a designated department in banks and in financial institutions and in brokerage houses, especially investment management firms. There is a designated department, risk management department, headed by the chief risk officer. So an organization that is significantly larger in size will designate a risk officer. A risk officer. He is the centralized person who will coordinate all this risk management activity. So there are three different lines of management related to risk management process. Three different lines of management related to ERM. Let us discuss them one by one. First of all, I told you the departmental heads who will be facing the risk associated with their department, like treasury department faces a risk exchange rate risk, that they have the foreign exchange available. Adverse exchange rate movement can put their foreign denominated assets at risk, right? Inventory or warehouse control, they are facing a risk of obsolescence, pilferage, deterioration, fire. So each functional unit, department faces certain risks. These functional units, the head of these functional units are called risk owners. Mind the word? Risk owners. So let us read these 3 lines of management accountability. The first line consists of principal owners of the risk. These are the managers of various functional departments. So they manage performance and risk taken to achieve strategy and objective, particular departmental heads. The second line consists of supporting this one. The risk officer. Risk officer is not primarily risk owner. Risk is being owned or being faced directly by the departmental heads or functional heads. But he is overseeing the overall risk management process. So he is the second line in defense. I'm sure you people know, audit committee gets functional reports from the chief audit executive, and that report is on 3 types of things. How effective is the system of internal controls? How robust is the risk management process? And finally, the report on governance. So it means the chief audit executive, the internal audit department, is not the frontline player. Frontline player are the risk owners. Second defense is the risk manager. The person is designated with the risk management job. And lastly, the last one are the internal auditors. The third line, assurance, is the internal auditing. So what they do, they audit the ERM, they conduct audits on effectiveness of enterprise risk management system. They identify if they find any issues, they report any weaknesses and report it to the audit committee, and the audit committee will take the necessary steps to remedy the effects. So finally, this is the improvised model of COSO. The model that is given in your book is not very good one. This is quite effective. Let me explain this figure. If you can understand this overall structure well, you get the fuller idea. Let me explain first. Let us discuss these one by one. Guys, look at this. Governance and culture. The overall, we have read it in COSO, internal control framework. The overall management operating style, tone at the top, organization culture. This is a part of your governance. So this provides the overall foundation, the overall framework on which the ERM model will work. This is represented by orange color in this line. Next is information and communication. This is represented by the red color line, red color stripe. See, so this provides a foundation that goes on along all the. So, and let us see the flow of mission vision towards the implementation and performance. I'm sure you people are aware, mission, vision and core values. We have discussed in detail. That's the reason we discuss the key terms first, so that we know what they mean in the whole composition of COSO model. So mission, vision and core values, agreed. These provide the basis of strategy formulation. So using mission, vision and core values, we develop strategy. Once the strategies have been developed, we develop business objectives. I'm sure you people must be aware of the difference between strategy and business objective. Strategy from the point of ERM is the way an organization will achieve its mission, vision and core values. Strategy is the way we achieve our mission, vision and core values. And what is business objective? These are the steps we take to achieve the strategy. This is how we use these terms in ERM. So, through vision, mission, we drafted strategies. From strategies, we built business objectives, and then we implemented these objectives and strategies to finally achieve the organizational goals, create values, preserve value, transfer value. Resultingly, it will enhance value for the stakeholders. So all this process moves through a timeline from mission, vision towards enhanced value, and there are certain support aspects. Governance is a support to the whole COSO model. Information and communication is a support. So these two given in orange stripe and the red one represents the supporting aspects components of COSO model. Mind the word, supporting aspect component. Then the other three colors here, blue color represents strategy and objective setting. The green stripe represents the performance evaluation, regular variance analysis, comparing budgets with the standards, with the actual performances, and review and revision, taking corrective actions. This is represented by a purple color stripe. So you can see it's a mismatch of various support activities and common processes. Let me tell you, these two, governance and culture, they are called support activities. They are the foundations for the overall system of ERM. And then these remaining three, they represent the common processes components. We will discuss these in detail. This is your COSO model. This picture is the COSO model. We will discuss them in much more in detail. So let's move on. Here we go. So it says COSO ERM framework consists of 5 interrelated components. These are the components, guys. These two are called the support components, and these three are called the common process components. Support components and this is the entire picture of ERM. The key terms have been discussed. If you can understand this figure, you will understand the concept of ERM. So let us just view one by one. It says that these 5 components, interrelated components that you've just seen, it has 20 principles attached to it. I will explain it in the coming slides. As I told you, the governance and the information system, this provides the basic supporting aspects components of ERM. Discuss in detail. Supporting aspects components of ERM. Governance, culture, information, communication. We will discuss them much more in detail in the coming slides. Then the remaining 3, which you call the common processes, represented by this blue stripe, the green stripe, and this purple stripe. These are called the common purposes. Process components. Common process components. They are the strategy and objective setting, performance, and finally the review and revision. Let us read these 5 components in detail together with the 20 principles he has listed. This is the core. This is ultimately the ERM model we are doing. 5 interrelated components and 20 principles. And they are given in this massive slide. ERM has these 5 components. This one is the support. And these 3 are common processes. And it said there are 20 principles. We will discuss these principles after this ERM is over. 1, principle 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 principles are associated with governance and culture. 1, 2, 3. 4 principles are associated with strategy and objective, total 9. Then 3 principles are attached with performance, giving the number to 12, or 4 in fact, 13 now. 3 for review and revision, and finally 3 for information communication. So these are the 20 principles. So this is the overall ERM. What we have read so far with the key components of it, and this is the overall framework of the enterprise ERM. Support processes, common processes, and corresponding 20 principles. So let us do each one of them one by one, and then we'll be done. We need to do them each of them in detail to understand exactly what do they mean in the organizational context. So I will try to be as brief as possible because we have understood the key dynamics of ERM. We just need to understand the model. The terms have been discussed much more in detail. So the first component, which in fact is a support process, governance and culture. Let us discuss this one by one. Governance and culture we have discussed much more in detail. This is the overall foundation for the organization. The board of directors, the audit committee, that provide the foundation of any organization. It has 5 principles attached to it. Governance and culture. Culture discussed in detail. I'm sure you remember. Oversight. The board of directors, the senior most entity in an organization, has a responsibility of oversight from the point of view of ERM. ERM is being overseen by the board of directors. ERM practices, 3 things. ERM practices, ERM capabilities, and the overall process of ERM is being overseen by the board of directors. This is the first principle, governance and culture. That oversight is being done by the board of directors. Next is the operating structure. We have discussed this in detail, the key term. Operating structure is how the organization is laid out in an organizational chart, how the responsibilities, information, and directions are passed on from the top to the bottom. It could be a linear structure from top to bottom. It could be a matrix structure. So the structure of organization could be done. This is decided by the board of directors. Then the third principle, the organization culture. We have discussed much more in detail what is culture. Yes. Then we discussed core values. Core values are essential beliefs. This is the fourth principle. The fifth one is that your governance and culture will attract, develop and retain new talent. A good organization that has good market standing, a good governance and culture will attract competent people towards the organization. So a good governance and good organization with good culture will attract new recruits, will develop and retain such talented people. So this is the first component of your ERM model. Next is the strategy. Next one, that has been discussed in detail and explained in fully. Next is the COSO ERM, strategy, objective setting. Let us discuss in detail. And there are 4 principles attached to this component of ERM. First, what is strategy and objective setting? We have discussed strategy communicates what organization, how the organization will achieve its mission and vision, how it will achieve its core values. That's what has been defined strategy in ERM model. There are 4 principles attached to strategies and objective setting. First is the business context. Business context means the organization will analyze its external environment and internal environment, its core competencies. If you remember, we have read SWOT analysis in strategic management. Organization will conduct an internal and external assessment. So in business context, the organization will determine its risk profile, keeping in mind the external threats from the environment it is operating as well as the internal risks being faced. Next is risk appetite, how much risk a business can afford to bear, willingness to bear. And we discussed it in detail. Risk appetite, the risk that the business is willing to take depends upon your risk capacity. Discussed. Next element is alternative strategy. Like I gave you an example of a brokerage company I was working in. That company wanted to expand in Pakistan. So for that expansion, they focus on retail investors. Retail investors are common people, ladies that have some money with them for investment, or those who are doing job, they have certain savings. So we focus on those sectors that was ignored by the larger brokerage firms, so as to tap those resources and put them in brokerage firms to earn commission for ourselves and gain for them. So alternative strategies that how the business can achieve its mission and vision through retail client or through, there are 2 types of clients in banks and in brokerage companies. Corporate clients, banks, insurance companies, large investment firms, rich individuals. These are called the corporate clients. To the other side, we have retail clients, people like you and me with some money with them, and they can be viewed as your customers. So alternative strategies mean how an organization can achieve its objective using some alternative strategies. Then the 4th principle in strategy and objective is business objectives. We have discussed this in detail. What are business objectives? The steps to achieve the strategy of the owner. What is strategy? That communicates how the organization's vision will be achieved and how the organization will attain its core values. Keep it in the exact wording as it is used in the COSO frameworks. So the next area is performance. Discuss in detail. Third component of your ERM is the performance. First is risk identification. How do we identify risk? Facilitated workshops, brainstorming session, risk inventories, generic list of risks that a department can face. Next, risk severity. To what extent an organization can be hit by that particular risk. Risk priority. Once risk severity has been identified, only risk severity is not sufficient. Risk severity together with the possibility of occurrence combined. Only likelihood is not sufficient. Only financial impact is not sufficient to make a decision. Its impact and probability combined will help us decide which risk must be taken care of first, which one later. This is how we prioritize risk. Not the severity alone, not the possibility alone. Possibility and severity combined gives you EV, And through EV, we prioritize risk. And then accordingly, we'll allocate our resources. And finally, we have the risk responses we have discussed. There are 5 risk responses: avoid, accept, exploit, transfer, mitigate. Then this is discussed. Then there is a 4th component. This is we are discussed in detail. This is called the heat map. Which risk do we need to accept? These ones. Which we need to transfer, which we need to avoid, indicating from cold to the hottest one. The hottest, the red one, must be avoided because they are too risky for an organization to be. Next component, the 4th one, is review and revision. ERM, once set in an organization, is not some what you can call the biblical revelations. They can always be amended, keeping in mind the changing circumstances. So review and revision in our ERM can always be inevitable. There are 3 principles related to the COSO ERM review and revision component. First is changes. The changing circumstances, the dynamic organization environment in which you are operating might substantially affect your business strategy and objective. That might necessitate changes in ERM. Second component is the performance. Organization performance as viewed by the standard operating procedures, budgets, targets versus actual. If you are consistently showing adverse variances, lagging behind the performance, it might necessitate changing the ERM, might necessitate changing the objectives of the organization, might necessitate changing of strategy. It's not like ERM and the strategies are straight jacket that once you set you cannot change. You can always accommodate. Changes are always there. There is always room for improvement. So organization can pursue improvement in processes as well as ERM model. So the last component, which is one of the support processes, is your information and communication. Last component is the information and communication. Every organization, small or large, must have a system of information and communication that captures information from external and internal environment, processes that information, manages and conveys the results to the various levels of the organizations. All large, medium must have a system of information and communication that captures information, that processes information, prepares final results and distributes it according to the different management level. Right? Management accountant receive information differently. CEO receives summary, executive summary, right? So, information and communication reporting, IS support information system, whatever the size of the organization, must support enterprise risk management because information will provide as basis for ERM on the basis of which decision will be made to what extent the organization have achieved its objectives. Like we had 35 to 40 branches across Pakistan, so their commission report generated every week. Their losses generated monthly or quarterly basis will help us manage the overall risk management process. Which branches should we carry on, which we should close, which branches are exceeding the tolerance limit of losses, which are performing well. So information and communication is important for the risk management process. Decision will be made upon such information. Then your communication channels, the way you receive information at different levels of the organism must support ERM. Your branches, your divisions across the world or across the country give information to the senior management, accordingly decisions are made. And finally the last one, reporting. Reports are generated for the different levels of the organization. Like branches performance reports are compiled by the accounting department. The summary result is given to the chief operating officer for further decisions. Which branches should be funded further, which needs closure, which might need relocation. So the reporting element is also for information communication is very important in ERM model. All these terms have been discussed in detail. Last 2 slides and then we are done. Assessing ERM components. Enterprise risk management. How effectively is it doing? First of all, we have ERM currently existing in an organization. We need to assess its effectiveness at 2 levels. First, it is present in the organization. And second, it is working effectively. Just like COSO internal control framework. Having good internal control system doesn't mean it is working effectively. So its presence and its effectiveness must be regularly monitored. So its Present means the components of ERM principles exist in the design and implementation of ERM. And second is functioning. Not only we have the ERM, it is functional effectively as well. And finally, the last slide we have ERM limitation, enterprise risk management limitations. ERM has certain limitations. First of all, ERM is designed by human beings, not by machines. So it's prone to some mistakes and errors. Faulty human judgments regarding institution of ERM in an organization. Every response we select in risk management, avoid, accept, exploit, transfer, mitigate, it has certain cost. So cost benefit analysis must not be ignored. Every risk response, like you go for risk transfer with an insurance company, so that involves a cost of premium that must be compared to the expected benefit to be driven from insurance company. So every risk response you select has a cost and a benefit. It must be considered, and some cost benefits cannot be monetized. That's the limitation. Not every cost and benefit can be given in dollar terms. Third, some errors and mistakes can be made. Just like in COSO internal control framework, it says the control procedures, segregation of duties, custody, authorization, recording and reconciliation must be segregated. Same thing, if we have done certain ERM, we have segregated certain functions. What if they collude? Collusion will destroy your ERM as well as the COSO internal control framework. And sometimes, if not collusion, the senior manager himself overrides the control. So these are all limitations of ERM. Despite its shortcomings and despite all that, you will not unfortunately find ERM applicable in any single organization. Having read all this extensively for the last 1.5 hours, there's a bad news for you. ERM is just a model, and you will not find a single organization on the face of this planet where you will find this ERM model fully functioning, unfortunately. And that's all for today.